Hey, what's happening, everybody? It's me, Robert Phoenix, and I am back on the case, flying solo today here on the Friday FARcast. And we're going to be getting into some Mercury retrograde memory hole stuff. Hence, the clocks behind me, which all seem to be set at 9 o'clock. AM, PM, doesn't matter. Figure it out. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. And since it's Mercury retro, before I do that, what I want to do real quick is I want to put a couple links up here for today's show. So let me do that, and please indulge me here a little bit as I go over to the two social media sites that I hang out the most on. And that's going to be Facebook, because I am putting links up on Facebook now. So let me do that. And we're going to get into some Mercury retrograde and returning to the scene of the crime with some of these mass public shootings, some of which have been theoretically adjudicated, some that are still awaiting trial, and some that are swirling around the memory hole. So we're going to try to catch up on 4 of these events and give you some context and updates as to what's going on. And I think in one case, I'm going to try to reach out and make a phone call and do something live. Get some live info. It's interesting because so each state has its own laws regarding being recorded. And 3 out of the 4 states where these events have happened, you have to explicitly let them know that they're being recorded, or there has to be an audible beep that allows the other party to understand and know that they're being recorded. The only state on this list that has a one-party consent is New York. And that's probably the state that I'm going to reach out to and try to make a live phone call here and get an update on the Peyton Gendron case. Of course, Peyton Gendron was the shooter in Buffalo, which we covered from kind of this synchromistic, weird perspective, where there was all this really strange Buffalo imagery that was floating around. And then we even got into the juxtaposition of the bull on Wall Street with the gorilla facing it, right? So they do these weird kind of art installations right around the bull on Wall Street. And we looked at that. We looked at the juxtaposition of the gorilla and the bull. And then right around the same time is when the whole monkeypox thing started to happen, started to just kind of sprout up out of nowhere. So if you haven't seen those shows, they're over on the 15 Minutes of Flame site. And I think I did maybe one show on a Friday where we got pretty deeply into the whole Buffalo thing, Buffalo symbolism. What's really interesting too, as it relates to Buffalo, is that Peyton Gendron, who again supposedly went to that supermarket, of course he's got a manifesto and starts firing up his AR-15 and winds up killing 3 people, 4 people, one of whom was supposedly a guy working on an engine that was powered by water. It was the security guard at the market. Now, that's one of the high stranges. Posted in the 11th house. Thank you for that. I am going to post it here. So I'm going to get into some. Let me take care of this business so I'm not sort of multi-tracking in real time. Give me one sec here. Because that was my commitment to the peeps on Facebook. Let me change my image. I like the image that I have in the background here. Let me do that. It's kind of a cool image. And of course, I may freelance a little bit during today's show, which is nothing out of the ordinary. Let me go over to Twitter as well and post this. And we'll get into the show. How is everybody, by the way? Coming into the weekend. The good old weekend. Oh, it looks like there's more fights. More fights are happening. That's the new bread and circus for the masses. TikTok videos, VidMax, World Star Hip Hop, capturing the open air brawls that are now all too common in our society. I was talking with Emily Moyer just before the show about what's happening with these brawls. And I have a theory and some insight into what's going on that is more than just the programming, the tension, right? The polaric tension that's been going on with the programming. I actually have some thoughts as to how some of this stuff is happening. So let me do this with Twitter. We'll get into it today, and then I'll jump into chat. Normally, I don't jump into chat on Friday because I usually have a guest, and I'm just kind of off and running. So I do want to get into chat today and acknowledge people for being here. So let me just do this on Twitter. Give me one sec. I know we don't like dead air. So I am going to fill that dead air with a little bit of play-by-play. There we go. Let me throw in a new image. Oh, there it is. I like it. All right. So the rest of the world has joined us. Let me show you this latest video. And I'm going to use this as a bit of a jumping off point. We are going to go down the memory hole, and we're going to look at the case of Robert Lee Bowers, who was the synagogue shooter in Pittsburgh. 3 years after, again, he supposedly shot up the synagogue. He has still not faced trial. They're looking at a March or April trial of 2023 for Bowers. I'm not convinced that he actually even exists, which is why they're dragging this trial out. We'll look at Peyton Gendron, Bobby Crimo, and John Earnest, which leads me back to the point around what I was originally making with Buffalo and Peyton Gendron and the whole high strange that is connected to that shooting. So John Earnest, who was the other synagogue shooter in Poway, who we covered before, has been sentenced to a life term in a supermax in Colorado. And Colorado is where Buffalo Bill is buried, overlooking Golden, Colorado. I've actually been to the Buffalo Bill Museum, Memoriam, and his grave. And Buffalo Bill, they say he was a 32nd degree Mason. I think he was a 33rd degree Mason. Clearly, there's a Masonic symbol on his tombstone, right? His gravestone, grave marker. You can walk right out there and pay your respects to Buffalo Bill. So there's a strange connection between Buffalo Bill, Colorado, and the Supermax, where people like Terry Nichols, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, El Chapo, Eric Rudolph, and now John Earnest are, again, theoretically being imprisoned. So it's another interesting connection. Okay, so everybody knows that we're streaming live. And let me just show you this video since it's on my screen. Hopefully we'll have a Jasper sighting, but I think he's upstairs on the massage table waiting for his afternoon massage. Jasper's got a better life than I do, clearly. And I got a pretty good life, but he's got me running around this place, doing all these things for him, feeding him, petting him, his afternoon massage. Like, who's really running this program here? Who's really the producer of the show? It's probably Jasper. Okay, let me just play this for you here. And it kind of gets into a little bit of this topic, although not entirely completely, but it would make a good segue. So what we have here is a scene that is becoming all too common. This is in Vallejo. And Vallejo is in California. And for a very long time, Vallejo has been a city that has been, how should we say this? Economically strapped. So what we have in Vallejo is we have a high degree of minorities that live in Vallejo, attend the public schools. Vallejo was a city that actually filed for bankruptcy. I think it was sometime in the mid 2010s. And then as a city, it was also very out front with support for Black Lives Matter. Of course, you had the Black Lives Matter graffiti tattoos on the streets of Vallejo, all sanctioned by the city of Vallejo. It's a hard place. Vallejo is a hard place. And I think the main employer there is the C&H Sugar Factory, which sits right at the mouth of the Delta, which feeds into the Bay. I don't know what the status of the C&H Sugar Factory is right now, but for a long time, it was the main employer. They also have a refinery not far from there, ironically, in a town called Pittsburgh. It's a different Pittsburgh, but it's Pittsburgh. So there's also a number of people who live in Vallejo who work at that refinery. But other than that, Vallejo has been one of these California Democratic cities which has completely overspent, allocated a lot of its money for public programs that really, when you look in the rearview mirror, don't really seem to be making much of a difference. Whether it's Vallejo or Richmond or Oakland, or even a city that's theoretically well more way off with a higher median income like San Francisco, they have plenty of social programs. And the problems seem to keep getting worse. So what you're going to see here is this is a fight. We just started school. Remember, I talked about Mars and Gemini, to keep your eye on Mars and Gemini as it relates to schools. Because now we've got kids returning, coming back to school. And when that happens, there is the potential and the advent for what? School shootings. This one is no different. However, this one is off script because a football coach who is trying to break this melee up was shot, wounded. I think I guess he's on the road to recovery, but it's a school shooting. This is a school shooting. However, it's an off script school shooting, and nobody in the media will talk about this. The only time they talk about school shootings is when they're on script. So let's have a quick look here. I'm going to also get into some of the psychodynamics of this school shooting, this school melee, and what's happening across America. Like, we don't need WWE wrestling anymore. We don't need that. We have live bred and circuses that are being captured in airports, nightclubs, cruise ships, McDonald's, and now in public schools. By the way, this last week, what did we see? We saw a spate of beatdowns in public schools in their restrooms. Again, Mars and Gemini. What does Gemini represent? It represents schools, education, basically from K through 12. That's your Gemini right there. It's where you go to learn, again, theoretically, although that's changed dramatically. It's also where, again, theoretically, you encounter duality. Because back in the day, when you went to school and you were out of your parents' purview, right? There was a code. There was a right and a wrong. You ask anybody that's gone to a Catholic school, they'll tell you all about it. Catholic school, they wrap your knuckles with, I didn't go, but I've heard the stories. Some of these nuns had a bit of a sadistic side to them. So the wrap of the knuckles, right? In public school, you had to go stand in a corner or sometimes be removed from the classroom and have a timeout. I had a few of those, by the way. But that's where you learned about, again, theoretically, right or wrong, right? I mean, I'm not saying that this is, but you'll run into it there. Not anymore. That's gone away. That's been obliterated. But with the advent of Mars and Gemini now, what are we seeing in schools? We're seeing violence, open violence, violence in the bathrooms, horrible beatdowns. They're not even fights. I don't know why, you get into some of these video streams and you look at the comments and it's like, well, it's always been like that. People always fight. These are not fights. These are not, I know what a fight is like. I used to get into fights when I was a kid. Sometimes I did better than others. I watched fights. They were fights. What I'm watching in these bathroom bullying sessions, they're not fights. They're brutal assaults. So that's an astrological correspondence to the time that we're living in right now. And we haven't even gotten to the Mars aspect, which just, it's not just related to violence and fighting within the schools. It goes back to places like Parkland and Uvalde and Sandy Hook. All right, let's take a quick look at this little skirmish. Some American youth just working out their differences. Here we go. Vallejo, California. Which I haven't seen. You can hear the shots. So clearly you have one adult here. Oh, by the way, there doesn't seem to be any law enforcement there. There's a guy, you can see him here. He's wearing the Kangol hat. He kind of gets involved right about here. You'll see him enter the picture. Let's see, where is he? Right there. Okay. So I think this guy has a semi-official role here because he tries to go in and break this thing up, right? He's going to go in. He's going to try to separate them, pull them apart, which I think he does. Now they're, playing a little Michael McDonald and the Doobie Brothers, taking it to the streets. And then, that's a decisive blow right there. And then he jumps in, Mr. Kangol jumps in, right? And he basically forms a bit of a human shield and is trying to wall people off. Let me see him. Does he come back in the picture? I guess he tried to wall people off. At the very least, he looks like an adult. I'm still blown away by the amount of mask wearing that's going on here. And you can see people wearing masks, especially right at the beginning. Right. Where's the mask? So what is that? Is that FARcon on his is that FARcon? I don't even know who that is. The Invisible Man, Claude Rains. So here you go. There's a mask wearer. It's the new teething ring. And then of course you can hear the gunshots. Is the mass media actually talking about this? No, because it's off script. It's totally off script. So there you go. There's your Mars and Gemini right there. You've got violence in the schools. You've got bathroom bully beatdowns. You have a shooting in Vallejo, football coach who was there to break it up. Maybe one of those guys was his players. I don't know. Media talking about that? Nope. They're leaving that one alone, right? It's off script. So let me get into chat. I want to talk a little bit more about that and some of the conditions around that. And then we're going to get into the memory hole stuff. By the way, this Mercury retrograde, wow. Did I have a Mercury retrograde moment on Twitter last night? Holy shit. I was like, talk about people not understanding one another. Weird. Very weird. I'm not going to get into the gritty details, though. All right, let's see who's here today. Let me do a little recognition. Who do we got? We got Lil HK. What's happening? There's my man Ryan, the introspective woodworker. You know, I was on chat on Twitter last night. I was texting with Rad Chad, and kind of went through the history of this program and what I've been doing, just in terms of blogs, podcasts. And for me, it all started right around 2009, little Mercury retrograde here. And I fired up my blog in 2009. And then in 2010, I started podcasting. So I've been in February of 2023, I've been podcasting for 13 years. I've been doing this for 13 years in various forms. Initially, it was on Blog Talk Radio. And Ryan, the introspective woodworker, has been along for the ride the entire time. He's been on the bus. He's been on the train for a very long time. So tip of the cap to you, Ryan, and thanks for being here. And I know some of you have been around for a while, but it was also interesting because there's also been people that have gotten off the bus and off the train. So this is the latest rendition of what happened or what started in 2009. And honestly, this is my, I gotta say, this is my favorite rendition because we're just doing more stuff together. We'll be meeting in October in real time, which I'm really looking forward to, with David, the Leo King Palmer. So let's get back into chat here. We got Elizabeth Donnell, who is the exotic flower. She is representing exotic flower power. Miss Nikki's here. What's going on, Miss Nikki? Good to see you. Ivan Langley. Good to have you back, my brother. Sony's here. Hi, Sony. Let's see. Look at that. Even Elizabeth's been talking about this. Been transplanting baby flower sprouts all morning. Rocking the flower power. We need a little more flower power in the world. Fran is here. What's happening, Cece? Michael Pafford, he's back on the case. Me behaving too, or misbehaving too. What's going on, misbehaving? Susie Gemini gracing us today. Hello, Susie. There she is, the mysterious one, JMP Love. My man, Thomas Jordan, TJ, coming back from a much-needed vacation. True Astrology, hi. Who else we have? Lana Anderson. Lana, jumping in on the live stream. Good to see you, Lana. Mel Artista, welcome. Mo Harrison, Laser Eyes, showing up. What's going on, Mo? Dude, I've been watching you for over 7 years now. I try not to get too personal on this show. And if I do get personal, it's almost always going to be complimentary. And this will be in the same lane. When I first ran across Lana, Lana was in a world of hurt. I mean, a world of hurt. And 7 years later, this is a woman who has been transformed, got a new place to live, a new kitty. And I'm glad you're back, or I'm glad you are where you are now, because I remember when our orbits first started intersecting, and the amount of tension and pain that you were experiencing was very palpable and clearly evident. So congratulations. Congratulations for hanging in there, being strong, and getting to a place in your life where I think you're turning some corners. It's good to see this. Like when you have history with people, and I've never met Lana in person, but we have been crossing paths for a while. So I track people, right? Just like some people track me, I track people. So I'm here to bear witness to Lana's growth and evolution and transformation. Well done. Cheryl, going to be seeing you in October. Looking forward to that. What's happening? Good to have you here. Who else do we have? Monkeypox. Exactly. There we go. Lana says, today is the 7-year anniversary of my son being taken and kidnapped, but I have him in my life now and working on 50-50 custody. What a Saturn cycle after my Saturn return during that time. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That was Lana's front burner issue, and it was burning. It was burning. She was a woman that was on fire. And, it's great. It's great that you're here. It's great you have access to your son. It's great that you have a place that you are enjoying living in. This is where we celebrate the human experience and the stories that we all have. And Lana's is one of them. Good for you. We're proud of you. Let's see. Sandy D, AFA, live here in Ireland. Hardly ever happens. Garth Brooks playing in Croke Park, Dublin. 3rd of 5. God help me. You mean Chris Gaines? Garth Brooks is kooky, man. He's an Aquarius. He is kooky. Let's see who else do we have. Microblue. Hi, Microblue. Michelle on Wheels. The mistress of the email domain is here. Good to have you, Punk Rock Love, as always. Yeah, Lana says, so glad I went a little ballistic during that time. I'm a Leo, Sun, Cancer, Moon, conjunct midheaven. I'm a mama bear and then some. Yeah, you were definitely, I wouldn't say ballistic. I think you were intercontinental ballistic at that time. Contrast is a good thing. Beautiful weather out in Ireland. I would love to go to Ireland one of these days. That would be a bucket list country for me. Let's see. Who else do we have here? Anybody else? World of Bliss. LA Bliss going to be hanging out with us in October. Can't wait to hear her pipes get down on some yacht. That's going to be a treat. Thor at the door, my man Steve, checking in. DJ MC also going to be with us in October. Dr. Duke shooting last night right in my neighborhood. 16-year-old victim. What the fuck? RIP. Absolutely. Sorry to hear that. Especially in your neighborhood. Jesus. Lou B, welcome. Welcome. Lana chimes back in. Just realized that happened right after my Saturn return. And it's been an exact Saturn cycle of 7 years. I'm friends with my son's father now too. Unheard of, but he really needs it. That's a great story. Way to go, Lana. Way to go. And you started 7 years ago hanging out here. Harry Bowie, freelancing this Friday, liking the vibe. Good. I'm glad. Thanks. I'm sorry. I'm sure we'll have a guest next week. I'm working on a guest. I have one guest in the pocket. I'm trying to get another one. Let's see who else we have here. Elizabeth Light Tarot, good morning to you. She's checking in from Sedona. There's my man, Robin W.C. Ray. my musical text pal. Robin always sends me the most incredible music videos, virtuoso performances, stuff that I would never find, but really cool. I'm going to stay on the Lana train today. He paid the price for what he's done, but I don't have anger. I have sympathy, empathy, which shows me I've really allowed Saturn to mature me. Yeah, Lana, you were rabid back then. And I there's a reason why you were rabid. I get it. I totally get it. Slick Disc and high fives and electric slides, Star Family. Beautiful. I love that. This is the best chat on the internet right here. Goes without saying. I know there's some really good chats, some really good shows, but you guys are freaking top shelf. You never were mRNA, Bob Barker, Kaczynski, and Florence. Yep, he's another one. They're all there. All the heavy hitters there. Let's see. Lisa says, I plan on buying a bunch of gummies at Harvest. Chris will be there. He'll have a table. He'll have some special concoctions for us as well. Leon, Vincent, Vito, Radway, the Count is here. Welcome, Count Leon. Good to see you. Tondar in the house. Checking in. Have we come to the end of the scroll here? Let's see. We got Sandy. Hi, Sandy. I think we're coming to, I think we're all present. Oh, Sony's here. Hi, Sony. Got to give some props. Mary Ducina shared on my Cosmic Conditions page. Thanks, Mary. Appreciate that. Ralph Winter. Hey, it's been a while, Ralph. Always love Ralph's moniker, London Calling. It's a great moniker. Sadistic nuns. I mean, I've heard the stories about sadistic nuns. They were not my story. Gonna look the other way. You can look the other way. You can go get a cup of something. Let's see who else we have. Anybody else? Meredith's Lucky Stars. There she is. From North Carolina. Mars and Gemini. Yep. All right. I think we're good. Are we good? We up to date? Oh, Squirrel is here. Hi, Squirrel. Nice to see you, Jen. And then hanging laundry. Hey, back at you. Gabriella J. La yes, girl. Nice to meet you. What's going on, Gabriella? Tessa Dick in the house. Woohoo. The one and only. Beautiful. And Wendy Eater, the beautiful one as well. All right. I think we're up to speed. Okay. So I was talking with, we're going to go down the memory hole. But I was talking with Emily just before the show, and we were having a discussion about cannabis, THC. And we both agreed on the fact that whatever people are smoking now, and look, if you're smoking THC or if you're doing cannabis, I'm not here to judge you. It's not my thing. I do think it's really good for medicinal purposes. I'm all for the personal growth of cannabis. You should be able to grow it for personal use. That's where I'm at. I think decriminalization and commercialization of cannabis is not a good thing. It's not a good thing. It's allowed major players to come in and control everything, right? The RJ Reynolds, whoever has the money will control the trade. If you go back to the underground economy in places like Ukiah, Mendocino, where most of the grows were happening in California, it was a booming economy. The growers, it was illegal, but the growers were running their businesses. They were pumping money into the local economies. There were people that were working there as a result of that, whether it was restaurants, whether it was hardware stores, whether it was supply stores where you could get things like solar power, anything related to hydroponics, irrigation, right? So you had all these satellite businesses and institutions that were there in and around places like Mendocino and Ukiah and all these other places. They're gone now, right? So legalization, which people were banging the drum for, has completely cratered these places, and these growers are out of business because they can't compete with their commercial competition, the corporatization of cannabis. And who was leading that? It was George Soros. George Soros has been funding this, promoting this for decades. Because I actually had a good friend, God rest his soul, my buddy Mark, who was from South Africa, one of the most interesting people I ever met in my life. He passed away from leukemia. I think it's probably been about 3 or 4 years now. And Mark actually worked for George Soros. And he told me back in the 90s that Soros was on the cannabis train and he was heavily invested in it. So this has been going on for a while, right? So what's the reason why Soros, what is the motivation for Soros to do this? Well, one, it's going to destabilize the population. That's number one. Number two, there's always a commercial and monetary aspect to this. George Soros will make money off of it. So I don't think it's great. I don't think it's great at all. It also encourages young people they're going to get high anyway. I know that for a fact. And I don't think they should. I did it. And I'll tell you, I've said this before. I'm not going to, beat around the bush with it. I think it ruined my life for a while. I started smoking when I was 15. And I continued until I was about 20, 21, about 6 years. And a lot of it was every day. Every day. Like I'd get high on the way to school. I get high on the way to college. I get high on the way home. I get high at college. It became part of my lifestyle. And I was a gross underachiever. And prior to that, I had a lot of ambition. I was pretty ambitious. It's not like my ambition got drained out of me, but it definitely thwarted it. And the brain is still forming up until like you're about 21, 22. I mean, there's a lot of formation that takes place by the time you're 5. But from 5 to 22, the brain is still forming. And then you've got these cannabinoids that are introduced into the brain, into a growing brain. And I don't think young people should be exposed to it. If you're 18 years old or 19, you can make your own choices. And I know I sound like Walt Kowalski, but I don't think it's a good thing. And I don't think it's a good thing now with the type of cannabis. It's different. It's heavy. It's genetically modified. They have distilled this thing down to basically a hard science where they're getting the most potent strains, bar none, and then who knows what else is happening with those strains when they get to the market. So that scene that I just played at the Vallejo High School, how many of those kids do you think were high? How many of the people that you see in these brawls at McDonald's or any of these fast food joints or a nightclub or a cruise ship or an airport, how many of them do you think are high? I think a lot of them are high because it's embedded in our culture. Now, I also remember back in the day when I used to get high, that fighting was like the furthest thing from my mind. All I wanted to do was listen to music. And eventually, when I wound up having a girlfriend, have sex when I was high and eat. And sometimes think I had profound thoughts that I could never remember. Those are my pastimes. I don't know anybody else who veered too far off of that. Maybe some people could create and some people can handle it. I know there are people that can handle it. And they probably have really good strains that are, less modified. Clearly I was not one of those people. South Node and Pisces eventually I got the message. But I didn't want to throw down, right? That was not at the top of my list. And I don't think it was at the top of many people's lists. So when we look at the spate of violence that is now erupting like a boil across our country, of course, there's the social programming. There's a divisive nature of duality and the virus known as critical race theory, divide and conquer, separate, separate, separate. All that is fuel to the fire. But what about the pharmacological effects that are taking place inside of these people's heads that are becoming violent? I don't think that's on the table. And it should be. It should be. Now, you throw in the late, and again, I'm sounding like Walt Kowalski, but you throw in the latest version of hip hop, whether it's mumble rap or trap, and you try to listen to that, it's unlistenable. And I'm not a big hip hop guy, but there is some hip hop stuff I like. I love the Jungle Brothers. I thought they were great. Black Alicious were great. Del the Funky Homo Sapien. I like Del the Funky Homo Sapien. Like there was some cool shit back in the day. I even got hooked up with this guy named Phoenix Orion. And he was connected with my friend who knew Mark, the guy who was connected to George Soros. So there's a circle of life here. Another hip hop guy. So it's not like I didn't appreciate hip hop, but what's happening now, it's a sonic torture. It is a sonic torture. We're also dealing with things like subsonic frequencies that we've never dealt with before. I listened to a great interview with Nile Rodgers last week. I love Nile Rodgers. Nile Rodgers, if you know who he is, he's the guitar player for Chic, amongst many other things. Nile Rodgers has been involved either as a producer, songwriter, or performer, and sometimes all three. And in that capacity, Nile Rodgers has been involved in the sale of 500 million records and CDs. Wrap your head around that. One guy is connected directly to 500 million CDs or records. 75 million singles. Nile Rodgers might be the most prolific and successful songwriter, musician, producer in history. He's a Virgo too. September 19th. I love Nile Rodgers. And he mentions this. I'll put the interview in the show notes. It's a Red Bull interview. It's a big, rambling interview, over 2.5 hours. And you don't get tired of it. He's a great storyteller. And he talks about back in the day, we didn't have the same kind of frequencies with the bass. And in fact, Bernard Edwards, who's the famous bass player who was part of that duo with Nile Rodgers, they had to shave off the bottom end with the bass for a lot of these records that they made. And now it's just completely gone in the other direction. So when you get into those subsonic frequencies, like they are hitting people in ways that they don't even understand. So you bring the subsonic frequencies together with everything else that's going on, in the context of that 4 or 5 minute song, whatever is being played out. You throw on top of that the genetically modified, highly, highly cultivated crunk. What's that going to do to the space between people's ears? How is it going to affect their nervous system, their subconscious, and even to some degree, their genetics, right? They're being manipulated. It's another form of programming. This is deep sonic audio, psychotronic programming. And we wonder why now we're living in a culture that is openly promoting violence and aggression. Like this is one of the threads that runs through all of it. And, you know, I watched Jason Whitlock, and Jason has basically a running count of young hip hop artists who get killed. The most recent was a guy who was a rapper from Philadelphia, and he rolled into a Roscoe's Chicken in LA, which I've been to. And he rolled in there wearing a bunch of bling. What happened? He got shot, killed. They took his shit, right? So this undercurrent of violence and death is completely pervasive in the hip hop culture. It's becoming more regular on a daily and weekly basis, but it's also proliferating and moving out into the dominant culture. And I believe that this is a problem. And it's a problem that's not even being discussed. In the mainstream, they're promoting the legalization of not just cannabis, but now they're into the legalization and the promotion of psychedelics. They talk about things like microdosing. They talk about things like the therapeutic effects of mushrooms and LSD. Ayahuasca has become a cocktail drink, right? So what's going to happen when those things are legalized? Same people are going to take them over. Same people who took over the cannabis trade, they're going to take over the psychedelic trade. That's what's going to happen. And then who knows what happens after that, right? Because once they get their hands on it, they can manipulate anything. Change a molecule here or there. And instead of LSD-25, you got BZ. And then you've got Jacob's Ladder. And you have just waves of violence. So I promise I'm going to get to the memory hole stuff. But there is another topic that is related to this that I said that I would talk about and bring up. And I think this is a perfect time to talk about it. So let me go into, let me go over here, use a better search engine than shitty Google. So I'm going to go to an old website here. By the way, educate-yourself.org is a really, really good resource. A lot of the articles are older, which are good because you're going to get some of the straight, uncut pieces of information that the search engines will keep away from your prying eyes. So you can just see here, I used to go to this website frequently back in the day and just look at what we have here. We've got colloidal silver, chemtrail sylphs, emerging diseases, forbidden cures, ozone, immunity boosting, nutrition, tone gen, mind-body connection. And you get down into some heavy stuff. Trevor Constable, Al Bielek, Phil Schneider, who else we have? Bill Cooper, David Brandt, Bryce Taylor's in here. Like, you know, if you want to go down some rabbit holes, Tavistock, U.S. concentration camps, FEMA, aliens are coming. You know, use your discernment. But if you want to go down some rabbit holes, this is a really, really good resource. And they actually have some other things here, like treat parasites, swine flu hoax vaccine. And you get into like ozone generators, colloidal silver. So it's not just, hey, let's go down the dark rabbit hole and get trapped there. There are actually some things in here that are helpful. So this is from May 29, 2003. It's an article by Joe Vialis, and it gets into some of the stuff that we're talking about, which is programmed rage. Because this is what we're seeing. We're seeing programmed rage erupt, and we haven't seen anything yet. So the original title here is American Mind Control in Baghdad. This has to do with Rwanda. Operation Crimson Mist. During the late afternoon of 6 April 1994, a hail of cannon shells tore through the fuselage of a commercial jet airliner flying overhead central Rwanda. Several seconds later, the blazing plane exploded on impact with the ground, killing President Habyarimana of Rwanda, President Ntaramira of Burundi, and most of their senior government officials. In that fatal millisecond of time, the entire political command structure of Central Africa was decapitated, leaving the way open for Operation Crimson Mist, the most obscene terminal mind control experiment ever mounted by the United States of America against a sovereign nation. That Crimson Mist has been used again recently on a smaller scale in Iraq, is now beyond doubt. As Habyarimana and his colleagues made their death dive, a small group of American men and women lounged around a large, but at the edge of a discreet gravel airstrip a few miles from the Rwandan capital, Kigali, temporary home for their 3 unmarked C-130 Hercules transport planes. All crew members carried forged credentials, showing them as atmospheric researchers employed by an authentic civilian American agency. But these were only for emergency identification. If one of the aircraft was forced to make an unscheduled landing on unfriendly territory for all practical security purposes, neither they, nor their 3 large aircraft were ever in Africa. Kind of the Mission Impossible deal. When news of the presidential crash came in over the VHF radio, one of the Hercules planes was swiftly prepared for takeoff. The flight engineer checked the attachment of the radar rocket-assisted takeoff packs, while the scientists made final adjustments to a large microwave dish mounted on the rear of a loading ramp of the aircraft. It was this strange and esoteric piece of equipment alone that would directly contribute to the deaths of more than 1 million African civilians during the 100 days that followed. Though completely silent in operation, the single microwave dish had more killing potential than a whole squadron of AC-130 Spectre gunships, armed with 50 Gatling cannons. Subtitle, Willing to Commit Mass Murder. Though officially tagged an experiment, none of those present had any doubt that this was merely a cosmetic cover for the gruesome operational work ahead. Each member had been carefully vetted and then vetted again by U.S. intelligence to ensure they had the right stuff and were philosophically committed to 2 objectives. First was the evolving need to control or eliminate political dissent by remote means in the run-up to the 21st century. And second was the need to stem or reverse massive population increases across the world, which threatened to overwhelm existing natural resources, especially water and food. Intrinsically, this required a willingness to commit mass murder. And everyone present had passed this critical test with flying colors. As the Hercules engine started with a roar, American agents in Kigali were working alongside local civil servants and members of the Rwandan Security Service, ramping up public suspicion about foul play in the presidential air crash. Urged on by corrupt officialdom, Hutu tribesmen started marching on Tutsi tribesmen and threw a few rocks at them. Oh, here he is. The Lion King. Come on over. Yes, I know. You'll get your massage later. You'll get your massage later. Yes, you will. Yes, you will. All right. Let's go back to this. Innocent enough at the outset, although with a few nasty machete cuts here and there. But then the C-130 Hercules made a carefully calculated pass directly over the advancing Hutu, and they suddenly went berserk. Eyes glazed, the mood of the Hutu crowd went from simple anger to uncontrollable rage. And within minutes, hundreds of assorted Tutsi body parts were flying through the air, creating electronic rage. What the Hercules crew had just achieved had been an open secret since the late 50s, when researchers actually discovered that there is a precise control brainwave for literally everything we do and for everything we feel. The problem back then was that each of these control brainwaves, rage, fear, panic, lethargy, vomiting, and so on, had to be transmitted with an accuracy taken out to 3 decimal places, or they simply did not work at all. But as the years rolled by, and with the advent of transistors and microprocessors, the operational application of precise control brainwaves became practical reality. It is important to note here that the lethal trick repeated hundreds of times by the C-130 Hercules in Rwanda during April through July of 1994 was not classic mind control in the ultimate conspiratorial meaning of the term, where people claim to hear complicated messages inside their heads, or where it is feared that the NSA, for similar, intend to turn everyone into helpless zombies by implanting electronic chips in their arms or necks. What the C-130 crew were actually engaged in was electromagnetically augmenting a pre-existing state. Remember that the agents and security service personnel first had to point the Hutu tribesmen in the direction of the Tutsi, induce reasonable anger, and make sure that they were appropriately armed. Only then could the C-130 go to work with a precise control brainwave of rage, augmenting and thus upgrading crowd behavior from that of angry demonstrators to uncontrollable genocidal maniacs. Although not classic, this was and is unquestionably mind control, for the simple reason that external means were being used to force an irresistible change in behavior. For those who really want to know how governments or agencies change public behavior on a whim, the explanation is not too complicated, though obtaining details of the classified controlled brain frequencies is all but impossible. Various academics have actually demonstrated some of these effects quasi-publicly over the years, which provides hard reality for skeptics. One of the leading lights in this field is Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher-Weiss, who is a nuclear scientist and researcher at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and Stanford Research Institute. Both of those places, by the way, are major centers for DARPA. And DARPA, in the early 2000s, DARPA was running operations in Berkeley, in Oakland, and in the East Bay. And I don't want to get into how I know this, but they were. Now, hold on a second. I'll tell you how I know. There are 2 things that confirm this. Number one was I was living there at the time, and I experienced incredibly strange anomalies personally during that time. Incredibly strange anomalies. And at one point, one night when I was working on my blog at about 1:30 in the morning, I was living in Albany, California. I felt something hit me square in my third eye. It was like a tuning fork had hit me in my third eye. And then there were a series of waves that went from one lobe to the other. And it creeped me out. It wasn't like I was having an opening in my pineal gland. I know what that's like. It wasn't that. The next day, I wound up succumbing to a bout of vertigo that hospitalized me. I had to deal with that vertigo for roughly 6 months afterwards as I tried to stabilize it in my body. One of the things I did is I went to an acupuncturist, one of the first acupuncturists ever to practice acupuncture in the United States. And I told him my story, and he said, well, you're about the 6th person this week that's come to me with the same symptoms. This is in the East Bay. Something was going on in the East Bay at that time. And I had Dr. Eric Karlstrom on my show a couple of years ago. He was in the same area at the same time. And he's a professor. I think he's at, what is that college in Central California? It'll come to me. He was there in the East Bay at the same time. The same thing happened to him. And he has actually become one of the leading experts on psychotronic mind control. So this person, Elizabeth Rauscher-Bice, who is employed by DARPA and Stanford, right? He's sourcing somebody who is close to the source. All right, here we go. She was also the professor of physics at John F. Kennedy University of California, research consultant to NASA and the U.S. Navy, and a member of IEE, APS, AAAS, MAA, NAA, AAMI. I don't know what those stand for, but I'm assuming they're important. Elizabeth Rauscher-Bice identified specific frequency effects to induce nausea, happiness, and many other behavioral states decades ago. Clearly, Dr. Rauscher-Bice is an enthusiast. Give me the money in 3 months, she boasts, and I'll be able to affect the behavior of 80% of the people in this town without their knowledge. Make them happy, or at least think they're happy, or aggressive. Unlike many researchers in this field, Elizabeth Rauscher-Bice tends to be open about her work, has demonstrated the effects many times in quasi-public forums, and claims to experiment only on fully informed people. Many years ago, during one memorable demonstration in California, she turned a specific brainwave on all students in the left side of her auditorium, whereupon their teeth started chattering collectively and uncontrollably. When the unaffected students on the far right side of the auditorium suggested this might be some sort of trick, Elizabeth Rauscher-Bice calmly turned the specific brainwave on them instead. The right side now suffered exactly the same fate, watched by the stunned but no longer affected students on the left side. Here we go. ELF, extra low frequencies. The main problem lies in the delivery of these brainwaves to the target, because they all lie in the extremely low spectrum between 0.1 and 25 hertz cycles, with all controlled brainwaves in an even narrower central band between 0.6 and 10.2 hertz. These are effectively the same as Earth frequencies, meaning they're very hard to direct via conventional radio transmission. Remember that in order to be effective in selective crowd behavior augmentation, you must be able to restrict delivery to clearly defined crowds in clearly defined areas. This is achieved by using extremely high frequency microwave beam, which is then amplitude modulated at the same rate as the desired control brainwave. This is much easier to explain with pictures, so take a good look at the diagram below. Message signs, carrier wave, amplitude modulated signal. So this article opens the door to talk about Operation Red Mist. Because according to Joe Vitalis and other researchers who have gone down this rabbit hole, Operation Red Mist is a thing, and that the extreme violence that broke out during the Hutsi and Tutsi slaughter and massacre of Rwanda can be linked to this technology. So what does that mean in terms of our current political milieu with the extreme psychological tension, economic tension, sociologic tension, all of it primed by ideological theory that is used to divide and conquer? Throw in the fact that there's also other technological agents like electronic low frequencies that are being transmitted through modern music, right? And what about the chemically and genetically altered cannabinoids that are being taken in on a frequent basis by people? You add all that up, and that's called primer. That's all primer. So would that technology be used on people outside of Rwanda, where it's isolated, and Africa being the target of any number of social experiments and the complete degradation and capitalization of resources? The answer to that is yes. I had Christopher Knowles on my show on Sunday night. We briefly talked about a movie called Jacob's Ladder. If you haven't seen Jacob's Ladder, I highly recommend it. It's not for the faint of heart, but I think it's a deeply powerful and really important movie. And one of the themes that's connected to Jacob's Ladder is the Army's use of a drug called BZ. And BZ was developed to be something that was, it's my son. I'm going to take this call. Hello.
Hey.
By the way, you're on my show.
Oh, okay.
What do you got? What do you got?
I was just asking about the Habib. So do I just go in today and say, like, what do I say?
So you have a gift card there. Tell them your name. Ask for Habib.
Okay. That's all I said.
All right. See you.
Cool. Bye.
Ask for Habib. Habib will hook you up. He needs a suit. I hooked him up with Habib. So BZ was created in an effort to make a more powerful and longer lasting version of LSD 25. And the Army experimented with it, and the results were, in one way, they were disastrous. In another way, they were like, wow, look what happened here. They essentially used it on a group of soldiers in Vietnam. They were guinea pigs. And they wound up hallucinating out of their minds and became engaged in friendly fire with each other. Although friendly fire is one of those weird words, right? It's like, it's not that friendly. It's somebody on your side, but it's not that friendly. And it was a scandalous moment in Vietnam, one of many. And it was all about experimentation. And so you had an Army troop command unit, right? They basically shot the shit out of each other on BZ. So that's in Jacob's Ladder. It's part of it. I don't want to spoil the movie for you. So we have the pharmacological side of this. We have the technological side of this. And the pharmacological side could easily be introduced into commercialized strains of heavy duty cannabis, amongst other things. It's not the only one. So that's what's in the air right now, right? So when you see some of these things happening, you have to wonder what's really going on. We know the social primer is there. But what else is taking place? Where are they investing heavily in high 4G and 5G public schools? Isn't that interesting? And what could be the impact of that on these young brains, many of whom in any number of cities still manage to show up and go to school, and in most cases, probably in an altered state. And if they aren't in an altered state at school, there's a pretty good chance they've been in an altered state in the last 48 hours. So this is something that is in the air, right? And we have been dealing with the social primer for a while now. Probably go back to Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray. By the way, I looked at the astrology of Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, and Trayvon Martin, and they form a fixed T-square. Trayvon Martin was an Aquarian, Michael Brown a Taurus, and Freddie Gray a Leo. And those were the three main guys that were the trigger, pun not intended, for the BLM movement. It all starts with those three guys, Martin, Brown, and Gray. So this is a good segue to the next part of our topic, which is part of the title for today's show, the Mercury Retrograde, and looking back on some of the shootings that occurred in various places over the last few years. So why don't we take a look at them? And I'm going to try to go down a little bit of the rabbit hole with maybe Buffalo, because I can probably do a phone call into Buffalo. Only one party needs to have permission. Of course, I'm giving myself permission. So let's take a look at the landscape here. All of them are very strange, without a shadow of a doubt. Why don't we start with why don't we start with where is the Robert Lee Bowers here? Oh yeah, it's over here, I think. That's not it. I got them all lined up. That Peyton Gedron. Let's do the Robert Lee Bowers. Let's do that one. Let's start there. Okay, so this guy was charged with supposedly shooting and killing 11 victims at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. Says he was 49. Now, when I covered this at the time, he had virtually no profile whatsoever. No profile whatsoever. And then all of a sudden he has a profile. He shows up very briefly on Facebook just before this all happens. Of course, he's got a manifesto. I looked at where he lived. I found the address. I mean, not in person, but it was like, who lives here? It almost looked like a cross between a studio and a storage space. I'd use the word temporary to describe it. So this happened back in 2018. And they're not going to get to the trial until 2023. So this guy's been on ice for 4 years. So let's see what this says here. Attorneys for accused Tree of Life gunmen say they won't be ready for trial before late 2023. And by the way, all of these shootings are prosecuted by the feds, which I think is interesting. I guess it's because they fall under the rubric of being terrorists, violating the Patriot Act, the anti-terror bill. So the feds come in and they get to run the trial. That was the case with John Earnest, which we'll see in a minute here. Federal prosecutors say the man accused of killing 11 people in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh's Squirrel Hill should go to trial in the fall. But defense attorneys for the accused gunman, Robert Bowers, told the newly assigned judge, they got a new judge in the case, that they don't anticipate being ready for trial before late 2023. The mass shooting happened on October 27th, 2018. U.S. District Judge Robert Colville held a video status conference on Wednesday as he gets acclimated to the complex death penalty case, which now has more than 700 entries on the court docket. He asked both parties to make an effort to create a realistic timeline for resolving the case. I will not be predisposed to granting continuances, nor will I move speedily or precipitously for the sake of appearances, Colville told the parties. Accordingly, you are all duly encouraged. Bowers, 49, is charged in a 63-count indictment of entering the Tree of Life Synagogue on Wilkins Avenue during morning services and opening fire. The synagogue housed the Tree of Life, or El Simcha, Dor Hadash, and New Light congregations. Now remember, this is on Trump's watch. Trump is president during this time. He's also president during the time of the synagogue shooting in Poway with John Earnest, which we're going to look at. Federal prosecutors said Bowers was motivated by anti-Semitic rhetoric and expressed those thoughts online in the months leading up to the attack. He also spoke out against Jewish people after he was wounded in a shootout that morning with SWAT officers, and again while being treated for his injuries. Here's a list of people that were killed in the attack. Several family members of the victims observed Wednesday's video hearing, the first held by Colville. So this thing is being dragged on and on and on. He noted the Boston Marathon bombing case, where there was more evidence, was ready for trial within 2 years. Long said the government's provided evidence and discovery that includes hundreds of hours of police body camera, surveillance and drone video, 45 different digital devices, considerable forensic evidence, 3D scans reconstructing the crime scene, and statements and interviews from more than 75 witnesses. Long said the mitigation investigation required by the defense in a capital case also is extensive. So why is this taking so long? Why? That's the big question. We understand that there's complexity here, but when they want to have a speedy trial, they can fucking get to a speedy trial. Trust me. That is not hard to accomplish. They didn't drag their heels out long with Ghislaine Maxwell, did they? And when they got to it, it didn't take long to ultimately charge her. What's interesting about the whole Maxwell thing is she's charged with trafficking and a number of other crimes, but there's no victims attached to her crime. There are no victims. There's no names. It's like, so when does that happen? It happens when it's politically convenient. We are simply not ready because of what COVID has done to our necessary field work. Bowers waived his appearance for the proceeding, as he's done for everyone since February 11th. So this thing is just dragging on and on and on. The further it gets out, the deeper into the memory hole it goes. And I'm just naturally suspicious based on what I was able to uncover during that time. It's almost as if Robert Bowers hardly existed in the months prior to this event at the synagogue. And I looked into this pretty deeply at the time. In fact, I might have done probably a blog post, a couple shows on it, and there's no record of him. The record appears just months before this happens. So who is he? Where did he come from? Is he real? Does he exist? Right? Why is the trial taking forever? I mean, there's a lot of, obviously, stipulations and legalities that theoretically are getting it. But I'm telling you, when they want to prosecute somebody, when they want to bring somebody to trial, it can happen. And it can happen very, very quickly. Very quickly. Unless, of course, they want to put somebody on ice for a while, in which case they can take their time. Just ask what's happening with the January 6 people. So that's Robert Bowers hanging out there in limbo. And maybe by the fall of 2023, maybe there might be a trial. That's 5 years. Because it happened in October of 2018, 5 years after the fact. Who will remember it in 5 years? Will anybody really care? Were there monetary settlements that went to the so-called victims? And that come from Bowers, because what I read, the guy didn't have a pot to piss in. There's no record of him working anywhere. There's one instance where somebody said they knew him in high school. That's it. What is our friend Russ Winter call him? Turtle on the fence post. He's like a turtle on the fence post. How did he get there? Typical turtle on the fence post. And of course, he's going to write a manifesto. There's always a manifesto. Don't ever write a manifesto. Never write a manifesto. The smoking gun. You only want to write a manifesto if you want to be known for your first, middle, and last name. Robert Lee Bowers. That's his name. Even the middle name, like Robert E. Lee, the racist general of the Confederate South. Programming. So let's look at his coastal crime twin. That would be John Earnest, who on the other side of the country decides that he's going to do the same thing. Again, on Trump's watch. Synagogue shooter sentenced to second life sentence. Well, one life sentence isn't enough. 2, well, that's real important. John T. Earnest, who admitted to a shooting at a San Diego area synagogue that killed one and injured 3 others in 2019, has been sentenced to a second life sentence. Killed 1 person, injured 3 others. That happens on a daily basis in many urban areas across the country. And no cash bail gets them out pretty quickly. And I'm not saying, by the way, that Ernest might not have done these things. But to get 2 life sentences for 1 death and three injuries, right? That's a lot. And there was never any real trial here. He just admitted it. Yep, I did it. I'm done. I'm gone. Ernest was sentenced to life plus 30 years in prison in federal court Tuesday after previously pleading guilty to 113 count indictment, included hate crimes and weapons violations, according to Department of Justice news release. So here we go. The feds are involved. These are all Fed cases. This happened in California. State of California has nothing to do with it. The case in Pennsylvania with Robert Lee Bowers, a Fed case. State of Pennsylvania has nothing to do with it. There, again, the reason why these are Fed cases is because they're being tried under the anti-terror bill, the Patriot Act, and these anti-hate and hate crime, the hate crime laws that have been in effect for a while now, going back to 2009, 2010. And by the way, the legislation and the wording of the hate crime charges that relate to things like terrorism, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was written by Abe Foxman of the Anti-Defamation League. I'm 99% certain that he was the author of that. He was previously sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole following a plea agreement in state court. Lori Gilbert Kay was killed in the shooting on the last day of Passover, 2019. Again, this is on Trump's watch, when Ernest, who was 19 at the time and armed with an AR-15 style rifle, entered the crowded Chabad Poway synagogue and began shooting. Ernest admitted to setting fire to a mosque in nearby Escondido just weeks before the shooting. The defendant targeted his victims because he hated the Jewish community and Muslim community, hatred that has no place in our society, and hatred that will never, never win, said Randy Grossman, U.S. Attorney of the Southern District of California. Following Tuesday's hearing, the defendant and his hatred have been silenced. He will spend the rest of his days and die in prison while he languishes behind bars. Prosecutors noted that a manifesto written by Ernest and posted on the internet shortly before the attack was found during the investigation, which Ernest made many anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim statements, including, "I can only kill so many Jews, and I only wish I had killed more. All people in this country should be able to freely exercise their religion without fear of being attacked," said Attorney General Merrick B. Garland. The defendant's horrific crime was an assault on fundamental principles of our nation. The Justice Department is steadfast in its commitment to confronting unlawful acts of hate, holding perpetrators of hate-fueled violence accountable. He never went to trial. John Ernest, what a name, huh? John T. Ernest, like John T. Public. John T. Ernest never went to trial. He simply pled guilty. So they never had to bring any discovery, any evidence, any witnesses, none of it. I guess he just manned up. He just owned up to his crime. So he is in Colorado right now. And I believe he is here at ADX Florence with all the other terrorists that disappear into this godforsaken Alcatraz of the Rockies. Look at this thing. They do have a softball field, baseball field. A couple of them. Look at that. So a list of some people that are there. You've got Terry Nichols at OG, Oklahoma City bombing. Robert P. Hansen. I guess he's a spy. Sold documents to the Soviets. Ramzi Ahmed Youssef, the first World Trade Center bomber. That was legit. That bombing was legit. Remember that? 1993? He's there. Richard Lee McNair, master escapist. Murder, attempted murder, burglary. See 2 life sentences. He's the Houdini of prison breaks, so they had to put him in here. There's Ted John Kaczynski, a.k.a. the Unabomber. He's there. Michael Swango, also known as Dr. Death. Poison patients. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, he's there. At least we think he's there. You know, I did a show with Russ Winter, and there are clear examples where Dzhokhar Tsarnaev does not look like the same person. And Emily Moore would also agree on this. She did a lot of stuff, you know, and I watched this thing go down live in real time. I watched the whole capture of the brother in real time on TV. I was up about 3 a.m. Larry Hoover, Chicago gang leader. So this is a Black Gangster Disciple Nation, also known as King Larry. It's like Kanye West asked Trump to pardon him. He and Kim, who lobbied the First Step Act into law. Kim Kardashian lobbied, created this First Step thing, and Trump signed it into law. This is when he started, you know, getting guys out of prison. Interesting, huh? Mamdouh Mahmoud Salim. So apparently he was a pal of Osama bin Laden. He's there. Richard Reed, the shoe bomber. He's there. Dwight York, also known as Malachi Z. York, founded the Nuwaubian Nation. That guy's trouble. I mean, when you dive into what he was doing, there was some very problematic issues around children in his compound. But he's also one of these guys who, in terms of like black science, more science, black esotericism, he's highly looked upon. There are videos of him online on YouTube if you want to watch them. Dwight York, aka Malachi Z. York, founded the Nuwaubian Nation in the late 1960s. The group grew from a seemingly benign black Muslim group into a black nationalist cult with wildly inconsistent, bizarre ideas, including the belief in UFOs, hatred of white people, and worshiping Egypt. A compound styled as an ode to ancient Egypt was even built in Georgia by some followers of the group now known as United Nuwaubian Nation of Moors. York's motivations and influence are winding and convoluted, but in short, he was a con man and a cult leader who used his power to systematically abuse children. In the early 2000s, he was convicted of racketeering and child molestation. 14 children testified against him and was subsequently sentenced to 135 years in prison. That was a place that Wesley Snipes was hanging out at. I think Wesley Snipes was putting charges like security there or something. You had Eric Rudolph, the patsy for the Olympic bombing. So they're all there, and apparently John Ernest has joined them as part of that Supermax. There's some weird connections. So there are all these like strange geographical connections. So with Buffalo, we're going to look at Peyton Gedron here in a minute. You have Peyton Gedron in the Buffalo shooting, right? And then you have this Supermax in Colorado, which is where Buffalo Bill is buried, who is a 33rd degree Mason, even though I think it says 32nd. He's 33rd degree Mason. And you have Buffalo Bill, who basically sold this idea of the Wild West with his Buffalo Bill traveling sideshows. And, there's a term called you were buffaloed, right? You were being fooled or tricked. And usually there's a little bit of force that is also connected to the word. Not a tremendous amount, but a little bit of force. You were buffaloed, right? So we got Buffalo, we have Colorado, we have the University of Colorado in Boulder, and I believe the name of their team is the Bison? Is that the name of their team? So there's interesting connections here. Now, then you have in Pittsburgh, Robert Lee Bowers synagogue shooting, mirror synagogue shooting with John T. Ernest in Poway. Now, what's interesting, it brings us back to Colorado through John T. Ernest. And that's when we get into the whole James Holmes story. James Holmes, who was the Aurora, Colorado shooter. James Holmes comes from the same area of San Diego as John Ernest does. The same area. Like, what are the odds? James Holmes is from the Poway area. What are the odds? And both James Holmes and John Ernest's fathers are both teachers. One is highly accredited in computer science. That would be James Holmes's father. John Ernest's father, I believe, is a fairly high-level math teacher, although I think he teaches at a high school level in California. So then now what do we have? Now we've got a connection back to Colorado through Poway between the two. And that's where ultimately John Ernest is going to wind up, is in Colorado. So there are these strange connections with these turtle on the fence post people. And prior to John Ernest kind of going off the res, And again, he theoretically set fire to a Muslim place of worship, right? There was no other prior indication that John Ernest was a sociopath. None. In fact, he was kind of a model child. He played classical piano. He was an achiever. He had an incredibly high GPA. It's almost as if this is the real world scenario, that John Ernest was flipped. That he might have pivoted in some ways in his own personality. Now, there's a chance that could happen. We just went down the rabbit hole with Operation Red Mist. We've just seen how frequencies that are directed to certain people can change those people. And in some cases, that might be true. That might absolutely be true. I'll give you an example of this. There was a period in my life, and I was actually living in Escondido, by the way, which is where Ernest was supposed to have set the Muslim temple on fire, right? I mean, that's where he was. And I remember living in Escondido, and I remember witnessing myself starting to get angry at everything. It was very unnerving. Like I had a really short fuse all the time. And I remember going into a bakery and being pissed off about some minor detail around a cake. And, you know, and I kind of, you know, I kind of went light ballistic, right? So I started to watch myself during this time. And it almost felt as if something was inciting me to be edgy and more angry than I normally was. Now, there could have been some domestic influences involved, but I'd like to think that I could separate those things out. So what I did is I began to watch myself, and I could feel this like slight sudden surge of rage come up in me. And I watched it. And the more that I watched it, the less it started to happen, the less that it became a presence in my life. It was almost as if I was witnessing this thing. And it stopped. And it was like, it didn't have the same kind of hold over me, because I was actually separating out from this, what I would call an ambient response or ambient reaction to minor shit in my environment. So it's also interesting that it was the same area, essentially, where both, you know, James Holmes and John Ernest came from. It's a strange area. If you go on the other side of Poway, you run into Rancho Santa Fe. And what was in Rancho Santa Fe? It was the Heaven's Gate cult. Like that was just on the other side of the hill from where James Holmes and John Ernest grew up. Marshall Applewhite and the Heaven's Gate cult. What was going on? What was going on between their ears? What sort of strange messages and frequencies were these people being affected by? Now, some of them were just probably out there anyway, right? They're probably out there anyway, looking for UFOs, community, life after death. I'll tell you, there was this very, very weird thing that went on with those people that doesn't get talked about very much. We're really kind of spitballing the memory hole here, Mercury Retrograde. So there was kind of a war of remote viewers that was taking place right around this time. And the forum for remote viewers, in one remote viewer in particular, was Coast to Coast with Art Bell. And Art Bell's go-to remote viewer was Dr. Doom, known as Ed Dames. Ed Dames had come through Operation Grill Flame. That was the remote viewing program set up by the United States government, the Psychic Warriors. So they started to have Courtney Brown on the show. Now, Courtney Brown is from Atlanta and has his own group of remote viewers. Some of them are actually pretty successful now. And I believe Courtney still teaches. He used to be a guest on my show. I had him on for like maybe 3 times. And he would describe what some of his remote viewers were finding. And I always found him to be a little eccentric, but interesting. I thought he was interesting, and I liked talking to him. And he was remote viewing this comet with a companion object. And this is what he was coming up with. Now, here's what happened. This is very strange. That Art Bell and Ed Dames had taken some information based on this comet that they had found from the University of Hawaii. Like University of Hawaii Observatory found this thing. And then they said that there was this companion object. I mean, I'm fairly certain that this is what sparked this. So Courtney Brown began to remote view with his team about this companion object. And he believed that it was a version of an interplanetary sphere that looked like it was a body floating through space, but was actually a spacecraft. That's what they were remote viewing, that this thing had life forms attached to it, and it was headed towards the planet. Well, who listened to that? It was the Heaven's Gate crew. They thought that the companion was the thing that was going to take them home. That's exactly what they thought. And so what did they do? They left their manifesto. Now, Art Bell and Ed Dames came back later on and said that they had left a trap for Courtney Brown. They actually did this. If you go back and listen to the show, they did this. Number one, they didn't want any liability for what happened to the Heaven's Gate people going back to Coast. They wanted none of that. So they were doing everything in their power to disabuse themselves of any liability and then gaslight Courtney Brown. This is what happened, okay? This is what happened. And this is just all on the other side of the hill from where John T. Ernest and James Lee Holmes grew up. Strange area, very strange area. That's a memory hole moment. There's some other weird stuff too that is connected to that area. Now, I wish I'd saved some of these links, but Emma Gonzalez, who was part of the whole Parkland thing, is actually related to David Hogg. They're related. And if I'm not mistaken, again, it's been a long time, and they've really like smudged the tracks. But if I'm not mistaken, Emma Gonzalez and her mother actually lived in Rancho Santa Fe. David Hogg, of course, lived in the San Diego area. David Hogg became noteworthy because he did a video at a beach where he kind of took on, the lifeguard or the beach patrol or whatever, right? That's where David Hogg kind of made, like, he comes onto the scene in this weird video. Well, he was living in San Diego. And there's a really good chance that David Hogg, more than likely, and I have to use my words carefully here, graduated from high school already in Southern California. I spent a lot of time on this. So if David Hogg is in that area, and David Hogg, if you go and drill down, right, you'll find he's related to Emma Gonzalez. It's through Emma's mother. And then when you look at the mother's past, and I did all this shit, right? You could trace the mother through a military family, and the mother grew up in Virginia. So all of these things are linked and connected in really strange ways, really, really strange ways. And especially the little circle in San Diego, Poway, Rancho Santa Fe, right? And even extending out a little bit into the coast, the beach where David Hogg, makes his bones. Anyway, we got two more stories to cover here. And these are the most recent. So let's go to Bobby Crimo, who's now currently serving time in the memory hole. Highland Park shooting suspect Robert Crimo pleads not guilty to 117 charges. Robert Crimo, the suspected gunman in last month's July 4th parade shooting in Highland Park, Illinois, pleaded not guilty to more than 100 felony charges on Wednesday. Crimo, who is facing 117 felony charges in connection with the shooting, which killed 7 people and wounded more than 30, appeared for a brief hearing Wednesday in Lake County Circuit Court. Wearing a jail uniform and a mask, so we can't really see his face, Crimo repeatedly told Judge Victoria Rossetti that he understood the charges against him and the penalties he faces, including life in prison. The 20-year-old faces 21 charges of first-degree murder, 3 of each for one person killed in the holiday massacre. He also faces 48 counts of attempted murder, 48 counts for aggravated battery, and 1 for each of the 4 dozen people. Prosecutors say Crimo admitted the rooftop shooting after his arrest. So there he is. There's Bobby. At least we believe that to be Bobby. Looks like him. Lake County Court. So there's his dad and his hot to trot milfy mom, Denise Piscina. Now, what's interesting about this case is that this is not being tried in federal court, if I'm not mistaken. So this is a Lake County court. The public defenders representing Crimo offered no comment on Wednesday, citing a policy to not comment on any ongoing trial. What's interesting here is that initially he was supposed to be represented by the same law firm that represented R. Kelly, which I found to be really bizarre. Like, how could that family afford R. Kelly's attorneys? Well, apparently now they're no longer on the case. He's got some crack public defenders representing him. So not guilty. Now we have the Highland Park shooter, right? Highland Park, which we connected to what? Highland Park in Dallas, where there's the Kennedy shooting, right? That's where Kennedy was killed, was in Highland Park. So we have the 2 Highland Parks. Again, there's this weird kind of twinning effect. And then we go back to Buffalo, where we have Peyton Gendron. And here he is. This is Forbes. Now he's got federal charges. And I don't know what separates him out from Bobby Crimo. So this is where we are, the Peyton Gendron case. 27 firearm and hate crime counts. Justice Department said Thursday, which she'll face in addition to New York State murder charges for the attack that killed 10, injured 3. The 19-year-old faces 10 counts of hate crimes. So there's something interesting with Gendron, Crimo, and Ramos, the Uvalde shooter. I'm going to get into that in a second. So, of course, Merrick Garland chiming in. So he had another manifesto. Got to have that manifesto. The thing that connects Crimo and Gendron and Ramos, the Uvalde shooter, is Discord. That they were on Discord. They were part of Discord gaming groups. They were, all three of them were avid gamers. All three of them were first-person shooter gamers. And in the case of both Gendron and Ramos, they appear to have had some contact with somebody inside of Discord who was, for lack of a better term, priming them. There's even a case to be made for Crimo and his little jaunt and sojourn from Highland Park, Illinois to Wisconsin. So there's a theory that the reason why he went to Wisconsin is because he went there to meet with his handler, and his handler was not there. So therefore he went back into Illinois, and I think he either took his mother's car to Wisconsin, or he came back and then he took his mother's car because they found him in his mother's car. That's when they corralled him. So all three of them, first-person shooters, connected to Discord, and clearly feeling like there was, for lack of a better term, some kind of grooming going on in the Discord world with the three of them. And then we talked about the shooting that took place in Indiana that was scuttled by the young man who was a pretty good shot from about 40 feet away. I believe it was 40 feet. I've heard 40 yards. And then the weird thing about that shooting, the aborted shooting, was the fact that he'd spent nearly 2 hours in the bathroom prior to coming out and, guns blazing, theoretically, right? Why was he in the bathroom for 2 hours? My theory is that he wound up getting cold feet, and he was essentially in contact with whoever he was connecting with or had been connected. And I'm betting dollars to dimes here. It's another first-person shooter, gamer guy hanging out in Discord. And he had to be literally forced to move forward to do this thing. Those are the things that I think connect these shootings. The other ones with James Lee Holmes, John Earnest, those are different. But even in the case of Holmes, there were people that had described a radical change in his personality, that he began to act very inconsistently, strangely, erratically. And James Lee Holmes was no dummy. He was no dummy. Like, this is a guy who had some very high level ideas around computing, Like he was a major asset. Like as his father was a professor, I think he still is a professor at Stanford. So we could make a case going all the way back to some of the psychotronic stuff. And let's say John T. Ernest did the things that he did. Let's say he did go into that synagogue and start, and even though that synagogue is closed now, it's closed because the rabbi of that synagogue basically stole a bunch of money, and it's tied into the whole thing with John Ernest. In fact, that rabbi got like a Medal of Honor or some shit like that from Trump. He went to Washington. Not a good moment. Not a good Trumpian moment. So that synagogue is closed. It's not even open anymore. And I don't know about the Tree of Life one. I don't know what they're doing in Pittsburgh. But clearly, the John T. Ernest that existed prior to the synagogue shooting is, again, not the picture of the guy who went in and decided that he wanted to kill a bunch of Jews. Kind of a night and day thing. And same thing can be said for James Holmes, kind of a night and day thing. He went from being, really, really bright, fairly outgoing. You read his profile. What is it? University of Colorado Buffalo? I think that's what they're called. They're called the Buffalo. That's their team in Boulder. You read his profile, and he was a pretty well-adjusted guy. He was pretty well liked. He wasn't one of these weird asocial computer nerds. I mean, was he on the spectrum? I don't know. But he wasn't like that. He was pretty well adjusted. People talked about his sense of humor. They talked about his good nature. And then something happens to him at the University of Colorado. Now, there's another piece to some of this, which I need to flesh out. And maybe we could do that on next Friday's show. So I do have one potential guest and one other guest that we can work with next Friday. So I need to hear about this other guest because there's a specific thing associated with that day. Anyway, something happened. Something happened with these characters. And even in the case of Ramos, I think maybe Bobby Crimo, and quite possibly with James Lee Holmes, is that they were also undergoing a particular type of dream therapy, which could, for all intents and purposes, alter their consciousness as well. So these are all part of the story. They're all part of the story, but the story just gets memory hold. And in the case of Robert Lee Bowers, we're not going to hear the completion of that story quite possibly to the end of 2023, maybe even 2024. So we're talking 6 years, after this supposed shooting. Anyway, that's where we are with the Memory Hole show. And just trying to bring some of these back. I decided not to get into calling Buffalo, trying to figure out what's going on with Peyton Gendron. If I do that, I might do that just on my own time and play the recording here. Before we sign off today, and I want to thank everybody for being here and being a part of today's show and today's chat. I did want to give you some updates on a few things. On Sunday night, I will be looking at the September 24th chart. I was going to talk about it today, but I decided to hold off to Sunday night. From an astrological perspective, I looked at this day, and there is a there. There are some very troubling aspects on that day. And I don't like to play the doom game, but it's not an encouraging chart. Let's put it that way. And it's feeling like we're moving closer to some kind of catalytic event in Europe. Germany just froze all of Russia's assets inside of Germany. So what we're seeing now is kind of this playing out of World War One and World War Two. That's what's happening. This is what's going on. And if that's the case, now remember this whole thing with September 24th came out of the mouths, I believe, of a German legislator who said, you're going to remember where you were in that day. And now we have Germany freezing all of Russia's assets. Also, apparently the United States has delivered more HIMARS missile systems to Ukraine. Why is that important? Why is that important? Well, it's because the HIMARS missile systems can deliver high-powered intercontinental ballistic missiles with a range of up to 180 to 190 miles, which means that the Ukrainians can now send missiles into Russia. That's a game changer. That is a huge game changer. So you add the freezing of Russia's assets by the Germans, then you have the introduction of the HIMARS missile systems into the Ukrainian arsenal, which allows them to directly attack Russia on its soil. September 24th is starting to look more and more like it might be connected to an international conflagration. So we're going to get into that on Saturday night. Again, I don't want to be a doom and gloom guy, but we'll talk about it. We'll talk about the aspects. And they're really not that promising. So come back here on Sunday night. We'll take a look at that. We'll take a look at some other stuff as well, astrologically, as we always do on the Sunday night show. And if you like this show, hit like, right? Subscribe, hit the bell. I don't talk about that shit enough. You can go ahead and do that. Tell your friends if you enjoy the content. We try to stay up to date here and talk about things that are relevant, talk about things that are behind the scenes. Almost always I have a guest on Friday, but today it was just me going down the memory hole. And I'll leave a link to that story on Operation Red Mist, which ties into the mounting rage that we're experiencing across this country, and not just this country. You know, rage is a thing now, and there are clearly contributing factors to the rage. Now, that said, if you want to deal with the world on a more balanced basis, there are certain things that you certainly can do. And one of the things that you can do is you can get into CBD. And my friend Christopher Lynch actually procures some of the best CBD that I've tried. We've been talking about it and doing our best to bring it to the attention of people every day on 15 Minutes of Flame. And True Hemp Science is a sponsor of all my shows. So I'd be completely remiss if I did not talk about their product here, especially after talking about some of these stressful things that we're dealing with in our environment. It's good to have some things in the medicine cabinet that can help you process the information on a daily basis. And CBD seems to be one of them. I'm a big CBD guy. I've experienced the medicinal benefits of CBD, both topically. I take the gummies at night. They help me sleep and get a good night's rest. And Chris has a number of formulas that help you with things like inflammation and dealing with the everyday stress of life. So you could come to truehempscience.com/ref/23. And then if you get $100 a product, type in 15mins, that's 15mins. Chris will toss you some free product. And if you buy $150 or more, you get free shipping. So there you go. All right. Got to get my little shout out for True Hemp Science. We'll be back here on Sunday night. We'll look at that September 24th chart and a number of other things. If you have not signed up for my newsletter, I'm starting to do a regular newsletter. Go to my website, robertphoenix.com. You can sign up there for the newsletter, and that's going to be going out on September 22nd. So the 22nd of every month, you'll get a newsletter. If you do support the show with your monthly contribution, you'll have a slightly different newsletter, and there's some bonus information for people that do support the show. You can do that to the tune of $5, $10, $20 a month. And I'm going to be firing up some webinars for all you people that have signed up for the $10 and $20 amount. And then I'm going to be having, basically, for all intents and purposes, kind of like a town hall Zoom call in October. And so if you're a member, you're going to get that as part of the newsletter, and you can be a part of that town hall Zoom call, and you can talk about astrology, ask me questions about astrology, anything goes. I'll be moderating. We'll be doing it for about 90 minutes or so. And that's just for the members only. So we're going to do more of that. We're going to try to meet on a monthly basis and, bring some more kind of spiritual glue to our community here. So we're working on it. We're working on the value adds, and I want to thank Punk Rock Love for helping the newsletters come together. All right. I think that's it. If you want to get a reading, go to my website, robertphoenix.com. That's there as well. And this Sunday, I'll be on One Bright Day with Lindsay Sharman, and I'll be talking about Chiron. So if you want to sign up for that, go over to her website and check that out. Okay. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. Thanks for being here. I'm Robert Phoenix. For myself